I wonder if you've ever found yourself asking these kinds of questions. How fast can I drive over the speed limit before I get a ticket? How much longer can I stay before I'm late at work? How much more of this pie can I eat before getting sick? How much more can I drink before I get a DUI? How far can I go with this person until it turns into an affair? How close to the edge of the cliff can I get before I fall off into the abyss? Whether it's driving, scheduling, dieting, drinking, spending, or negotiating relationships, our natural inclination is to live as close to the line as possible. The line between responsible and irresponsible, ethical and unethical, and for some, even legal and illegal. We tend to calculate our circumstances so that we can get the most of what we want before getting in trouble. Unfortunately, as many of us know from experience, whether it's one more drink, one more bite, or one more swipe of the credit card, just one more rarely adds anything. In fact, it usually subtracts. At some point, the law of diminished returns kicks in, and adding more makes it less fun or less pleasurable. More no longer feels like a blessing, but a burden. And this makes no sense, does it? But it doesn't stop us. In big things or small things, depending on your personality, we like living on the edge, and the closer we get to the edge, the closer we get to danger. Because when we're caught up in temptation, our judgment is compromised, and we often miscalculate. Has this ever happened to you? You think you have 5 more minutes, but you're late to work. You think you can go 5 miles over the speed limit, but you still get a ticket. What seems to drive this irrational flirtation with danger is a series of unexamined assumptions that tend to skew our decision-making. We tend to think, if it's not bad, it's good. If it's not illegal, it's moral. If it's not immoral, then it's acceptable. If it's not over the line, it's fine. But when these kinds of assumptions guide our decision-making, we build our lives on the lowest common denominator. Are you awake, church? Our focus is, how low can I go? Or if you're a Christian, how close to sin can I get before actually sinning? How far can I push my spouse before I find divorce papers on the dining room table? How long can I neglect my health until I find myself with chest pains? How much more can I spend before ruining my credit? But when we think about it, this logic is crazy. Just think about how we raise our kids or grandkids. When your teenager is leaving the house to go on a date, you probably don't say, drive a few miles over the speed limit, get a good buzz, but don't get drunk, go as far as you can without getting slapped, and don't get home until 5 minutes after curfew. Right? This sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Because it is. Rather than encouraging our kids to get as close to the line as possible, we say, be careful. Use caution. Be aware of your surroundings. Don't push yourself to the point of excessive risk. In other words, we say, don't dangle your toes off of the edge of illegal, immoral, unsafe, or unhealthy. While there are times in our life when we need to push the limits in order to heal and grow, By and large, the admonition to be careful is good advice, not only for our kids, but also for us. And this helps us to see the importance of the maturity question. Is this the wise thing to do? Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about some questions that, when we take them seriously, can help us to make better decisions and have fewer regrets. And so far, we've seen that it's helpful to ask at least 3 questions. Number 1, am I really being honest with myself? Number 2, what story do I want to tell when this situation is behind me? And number 3, is this a moral choice? Today, we add a 4th question. Is this wise? Experience teaches us that just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's moral. I'm sure you could think of a lot of examples in your own life. Likewise, just because something is moral doesn't necessarily mean that it's wise. It might be moral to spend all of your savings on a beautiful new boat, but it would be unwise if it left you with no money to buy books for your son who's starting college in the fall. It might be moral to underbid a project by using lower quality materials, but this would be unwise if it gave you a bad reputation in the community that you depend on to make a living. The ethical question, which we talked about last week, is really important because when we act immorally, we are usually led with regret. But the ethical question is not enough in and of itself because we can make decisions that are moral but also unwise. And unwise decisions can lead to a lot of regret too. In our scripture reading this morning, the Apostle Paul says, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." In this passage, Paul is encouraging us to be wise. He's saying your time on this earth is limited. And as the hours slip by, you can't get them back. So don't spend your time focusing on things that are going to leave you with unsatisfied cravings or unnecessary regrets. That's what foolish people do. They make short-term decisions that undermine their long-term happiness. So be careful how you live. Focus on understanding the will of God. Manage your emotions. Get your priorities straight so that when you look back, you can feel good about the life that you've lived and the legacy that you've left. This is what wisdom looks like in real time. Then Paul goes on to say that we need to be intentional about pursuing wisdom and cultivating wisdom, not only because our time on this earth is limited, but because, in his words, the days are evil. In other words, we do not live in a morally neutral environment. One time I was surfing with some friends at 2nd Street North on a clear and calm day. We were sitting with our backs to the beach looking for the big sets that were rolling in, and we didn't realize how quickly we were being ripped to the south. By the time we realized what was happening, we were way down the beach past coconuts. Likewise, there are cultural currents that operate below the surface that can pull us off track and take us to places where we don't want to go. And foolish people ignore these currents as they carelessly play in the water. And as we know too well in Cocoa Beach, they not only have the power to pull you down the beach, but currents have the power to pull you out to sea. Rip currents can drown you. And we all know that you don't have to go looking for trouble in the world that we live in today. It's only a click away. It's only a swipe away. So Paul says, be careful. Be careful and know the dangers around you so that you can protect what is important and stay on track. And one way to do this is by using reference points. So when you paddle out to surf with your friends, it's really important to turn around and look toward the beach so that you can find a couple of landmarks to triangulate your position. And if you pay attention to these landmarks, you'll know if the rip current is pushing you off the sandbar or ripping you down the beach, so that you can paddle against the current to stay in the right position. Likewise, when you're trying to be careful about the way that you live, it can be helpful to pay attention to at least 3 reference points: your past experience, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams. George Santayana once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." In other words, if you don't pay attention to what got you in trouble yesterday, the chances are you're going to end up in the same trouble tomorrow. Wise people, like all of us, make mistakes, but the difference is that they learn from these mistakes. They understand that their past can predispose them to specific temptations and blind spots. So while it might be legal or morally okay to go certain places and engage in certain activities, and while this might not be a big deal for other people, it might be extremely dangerous for you. For example, I know people that have cut up their credit cards because years before their spending was out of control. I also know people who quit drinking because for years they struggled with alcohol. So it's helpful to ask, given my past, what is the wise thing for me to do? It's also helpful to consider our current circumstances. Life is seasonal with lots of ups and downs, and sometimes we feel like we're at the top of our game, and other times we feel like we're just trying to put one foot in front of the other and survive the day. That being the case, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your family to pay attention to your emotions. Pay attention to your state of mind and your current overall perspective. Some of our biggest regrets come when we compulsively act while ignoring what's going on inside of us and around us. We fire off that angry email that we can't get back. We get sucked into a toxic conversation on Facebook. We impulsively make that large purchase, or we abruptly quit our job when we feel undervalued by our boss. And then a few days go by, and we find ourselves thinking, what in the world was going on inside of me? What was I thinking? Why did I do that? And the answer is you weren't. You weren't thinking, you were compulsively reacting. So this helps us to see the wisdom, especially when we feel all keyed up over something, to just stop, to take some time to process what's going on inside and outside before taking our next step. Then finally, the third reference point is to think about our hopes and dreams and to ask, is this decision going to move me closer to or farther away from what I really want? As a pastor, one of the things that's so painful for me is to watch people unwittingly orchestrate their own unhappiness. Do you know what I'm talking about? People unwittingly orchestrate their own unhappiness. They either don't have a clear picture of where they want to go, or they make decisions without checking this reference point. And they make all kinds of decisions that take them to places where they regret. In contrast, wise people make decisions today with tomorrow in mind. So when we put all of this together, we can hear Paul saying to us, Don't settle for what is legal, good, or culturally acceptable. Don't build your life on the lowest common denominator. This is a crazy way of living that keeps you dangerously close to heartbreak and regret. And God created you for so much more. You deserve better than that. And those who love you deserve better than that too. Rather, knowing that your time on this earth is limited and understanding the dangers that lurk inside and outside, be careful how you live your life. Don't fall asleep at the wheel. Seek wisdom by setting your sights on the knowledge and will of God. Focus on following Jesus daily while paying careful attention to your past experiences, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams. And if you do this, the promise of Scripture is that you will make better decisions and have fewer regrets. And that, my friends, is the good news of the gospel this morning. Thanks be to God. Hey everyone, it's Pastor Mark, and I want to thank you for tuning in. I also want to thank First United Methodist Church of Cocoa Beach, which helps make this ministry possible. If you would like to make a donation to the church, go to our church website, fumccb.com. Also, if you're in town, I hope that you will visit one of our services in person so that we'll have an opportunity to meet. May God bless you as you find your next steps in following Jesus.